Greetings, Race community. Brent coming in live today from Boulder, Colorado. I've not recorded a podcast at this elevation before, so hopefully I can make it through with today's guest, Kramer Crosby, president of the Ball State University Foundation and vice president for university advancement at Ball State University. Welcome, Gene.
Hi, Brent. It's nice to be with you. It's a real pleasure.
Well, we have really been enjoying getting to know many of your peers throughout the sector. And in fact, just recently, we were at the Case Summit in Chicago, and we celebrated rounding the corner on 100 episodes of the Raise podcast. And we had a great event at the Museum for Contemporary Art with a lot of our podcast alumni, if you will. And so excited to keep the momentum here today, and wanted to start by just asking you the question I've been asking most of my recent guests, which is very few of us in high school were planning for a career in philanthropy, right? And then along the way, we stumble upon the space. And so I just love to know a little bit more about your own higher education journey, and take me back to junior, senior year of high school. Who was that Jean? What was she into? And what led her to Ball State University?
Right. So, yeah, I was listening to some of your podcasts, and it's so interesting to hear how everyone's journey starts. So I grew up in Muncie, where Ball State University is located, and attended Burris Laboratory School, K through 12. So a lab school obviously is a little bit of a different format. So Ball State was really part of my story since kindergarten. We had student teachers in our classroom, had a familiarity with the university, and really a connection to Ball State. So higher ed was always part of my story. My father was also a professor at the university. So I don't know where my Ball State story started, because it's always been really part of my life. But junior, senior year, Burris was an interesting environment to be a student, because we had professors who really taught us to question things that they were teaching. It was always a conversation. And I think very early on, I was taught that having a voice and a space at the table mattered. And that just became something I assume mattered to everybody else as I entered the career world, that of course I would be invited to share my opinion or my thought, because that was always sort of the environment I'd been in. I found it similar when I came to Ball State as a student, kind of a similar environment. We knew our professors, felt like they were personally invested in our success. And so I think all of that led me to start my career, again, assuming best intent. Of course, my boss was going to be invested in me, invested in my journey, and wanting what was best for me. So, that's a little bit about who I was.
And so did you even apply anywhere else, or was it like Ball State or bust? I mean, how focused were you?
Yeah, so I think for me, it was always an assumption of like, of course, I'm going to Ball State. Like I said, I mean, I learned how to swim in our pool at Ball State. I had, gym classes came over to the university. So it really was always part of my life. And, we looked forward to it. When Ball State students came back on the campus, it brought Muncie alive. And so I always saw the energy that our students brought to the community, and knew I wanted to be part of that. So.
And so, sounds like by your, first year in college, it was really your 13th year or so of the Ball State education.
Right.
Did you know what you wanted to study? I mean, how focused were you going in? Again, recognizing that nobody says, I want to lead a foundation someday, for the most part.
Yeah, that wasn't on my radar. So I came to college, got involved with Greek life. Joined Chi Omega sorority, and really became involved in leadership roles on campus, but picked my speech communications major pretty early on. Again, because I realized that communication, if you could articulate a message and tell a story, you could pretty much do any job. That was, again, I think because I was taught very early on that making a case for yourself, for others, having a voice mattered. I saw that that was going to be critical to my success in whatever career I was going to go into. So I didn't know where it would lead me, but I felt like it was going to teach me some pretty essential skills.
And so at what stage of the journey, I mean, you're involved in Greek life, and so sometimes there can be some fundraising, at least kind of, grassroots fundraising associated with that. But ultimately, your first job out of college was with Rotary International. At what point did that get on your radar?
Right. So my parents always taught myself, my sisters, that giving back was important. So that was kind of a fundamental thing that we participated in as a family. So I didn't know that I wanted to lead a foundation, but I did think I wanted to go into nonprofit work. And so, back in the day, went to the library and checked out a book that had a list of all the nonprofits in the Chicago area, because my boyfriend at the time, which is now my husband, had moved a year before me to Chicago. So I thought it would be a good place to move after college. And so Rotary International was one of the first places that I applied to, and had an interview and was fortunate enough to get a job there. And my first boss was just really that lifelong mentor for me and continues to be. So
I am going to admit here that Rotary International is one of those brands that I absolutely recognize.
Yeah.
And as I was preparing for this podcast, I realized I knew almost nothing about it.
Right. Yeah.
And so what is Rotary International, and why do I know what it is, or know of it, but not really know exactly what it does?
Right. Yeah. So I think just like I did, I associated it with that rotary wheel that you see on every sign when you pull into a new community, right? The Rotary Club. So I thought about it at a very local level. But what interested me is that there was this international organization of members coming together to really do good in the world. And at the time that I worked there, they were very focused on the eradication of polio. But also, lots of other things related to students having an opportunity to study internationally. And, they have a variety of programs. But for me, the appeal was a large organization. They had between 400 and 500 employees when I worked there. 7 languages, everything was simultaneously translated. I mean, so as a kid from Muncie to go live in Evanston, which is a pretty cool town, to be a part of a large organization that was really focused on doing good. And I think, at a very high level, understanding that as a planet, we are all connected to one another and have a responsibility to take care of each other. That was something I felt like I could get behind and support. So that was kind of what drew me to the organization, and it was a fantastic experience.
And it says 1.4 million members, which include neighbors, friends, leaders, and problem solvers, and 35,000 clubs in more than 200 geographical areas. That is such a broad scope. What does that mean when it comes down to the brass tacks of fundraising?
Right.
Because in a certain regard, it sounds like your constituency is the world.
Right. Right.
It's like a broad constituency. Yeah.
Right. So it's an interesting organization and an interesting person, or interesting way to learn fundraising, right? Because certainly at a club level, that is going on, and there are projects that people are supporting within their own communities. But at Rotary International, you're really appealing to this sort of broad scope cause that you're hoping everyone can share, belief in. I will say at Rotary, the other piece of it is there's a structure to it. So there's an international board, there are district governors, there are zones, clubs, this whole structure. And giving to the organization is an important part as you move along your journey in a volunteer. And so I worked with the Midwest, and the eastern part of Canada was my territory as a fundraiser there. And it was just, as I said, it was really rewarding to see people serving something larger than themselves. It was cool to see it at the local level, but it was really cool to see that people wanted to support this at a global level because they really believe that we can accomplish something together as a community.
And so as it relates to going from 1 point something million members down to a managed prospect pool,
Right.
how do you go from, I mean, we see how much of a struggle it can be to go from 100,000 alumni down to 2,000 managed prospects. How do you go from a million? And as you think about, obviously it was a different time, technology and data wise and all of those things, but where do you start?
Right. So I think what I learned there that really has continued with me throughout my career is the importance of those human connections. So as a fundraiser, my number one tool was the volunteers. They knew their fellow Rotarians. They knew what mattered to them as individuals. They knew how to appeal to them and connect to them. And I really relied on them to build those connections for me because there was no way, I mean, obviously all of the Midwest, Eastern Canada, no way to your point that I'm going to know all of those Rotarians. But it was an important lesson that fundraising at the end of the day is really that human to human relationship. And the volunteers were in the best position to help me better understand what it is that the volunteer at the local level wanted from their Rotary experience so that I could then connect them to opportunities to give back.
I love the point about the importance of the human to human relationship, even at that scale.
Right.
And ultimately, it really can be make or break, right? The brand can be the same, the mission can be the same,
Yep.
the needs can be the same. The difference maker being is there authentic human to human connection. And my understanding is that one of your more memorable gift stories actually centers around that fact that same organization, same mission, same impact, but a poor experience relative to a great experience
Right.
can really be the difference maker. And I'd love to just get your perspective on that gift.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think that matters no matter where you are. And we certainly talk a lot about that as our foundation team here at Ball State, but we all play an important role in how, whether it's your alumni or your membership, as it was at Rotary, connect to the organization. So when I was working there, I had worked really closely with a donor who was considering a pretty substantial gift. It was going to be his largest gift to date to the organization. And that relationship was going very well. He was having a positive experience as a donor. We were doing all the things you do to steward and cultivate that relationship. But he was also a volunteer at a local level, and he had submitted some expenses for reimbursement. And there was a delay, right? And it wasn't much. But the delay, I'm sure there were a variety of reasons why that was happening, but from his perspective, he felt like we weren't responding to him. And to him, he then started to draw conclusions. Well, if you're not doing this like you said you would, does it mean that when I give you this gift, you're not going to do what you say you're going to do, right? So for him, it became this kind of point of doubt of, is this speak to a larger issue? How do I trust? And it was just such a valuable lesson for me that trust and belief in that we're going to do what we say we're going to do with your resources. Boy, that really matters, and it can go south quickly. And as a fundraiser, it was an important lesson that I had to not only manage all the things that were within my control, but sometimes help to manage the things that sat outside of it because they were going to impact that relationship one way or another. And so, like I said, we spent a lot of time at the foundation talking about every interaction that someone has with our organization ultimately impacts how they feel about Ball State. So.
And when you were in the role at Rotary, did you ever feel like, because like the affinity there is broad, it's local.
Yep.
It can range from like lightweight brand awareness like I have to deep volunteerism and commitment.
Right.
Did you ever feel like you were competing with university fundraisers or competing with other nonprofits where, why does the estate gift go to Rotary versus my alma mater? I mean, and I know it's a collaborative, rising tide lifts all boats sort of sector, but do you ever feel that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of our significant donors and a key volunteer was a president of his university's foundation, right? So I think we have to understand, and we do as fundraisers, that donors have a multitude of priorities and things that they're passionate about, and one doesn't replace the other. Sometimes it comes down to timing in their life or what matters to them at the, because you've got a special initiative or something that they're feeling really connected to. But yeah, no, there's always, I mean, and certainly, in higher ed, we realize we are not the only ones talking to our alumni. And so I'm sure they're measuring us against other things that they're passionate about. And that's always something that we're factoring in.
But let's talk about that transition, a decade or so in Evanston.
Yep.
It probably couldn't have been easy to, move back to Muncie, but or maybe you were ready to get out of the city and get back to your roots. Just what led to that move? And I know there was a quick pit stop before ultimately joining on with Ball State.
Right. Yeah, so I had two daughters living in Chicago. I had a really difficult commute, which anyone that's lived in Chicago, I'm sure you know what that's like, the unpredictability and how much time I was spending on the road. And I also had a lot of travel demands with my job, and that was just becoming harder to do with how we wanted to raise our family and, the time I wanted to be home and have that balance with my husband and my daughter. So my husband was a high school coach and teacher, and so he also had a busy life. And so we both decided we want a different pace, was really what it came down to. We had amazing friends and a work experience in Chicago, but wanted to move closer to home. So yeah, moved back and had a great opportunity to work for our local community foundation, which was really cool to grow up in Muncie, have been gone about 10 years, and then come back to this community that I loved, where my parents still lived, and really be in this great opportunity to give back. So it was a small organization, but that was awarding millions of dollars back into our community every year. And so it was a great time to come back to Muncie and see all the good things happening here and feel like I could be part of the change that was occurring. So that was a wonderful experience.
And after having been away for a while, I'm sure there have to be few better ways to get connected and get to know people in the community than working in the community foundation context.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a wonderful organization, long history in Muncie, and really a good example of Indiana as a state and the philanthropy of the Lilly Foundation. So they had an initiative several years ago where they really challenged every county in the state of Indiana that if they wanted to start their own community foundation, they wanted to support that to really address local needs. And so Indiana's rare in that every single county in our state has its own community foundation. And I think it's a good example of Indiana as a whole, really neighbors helping neighbors, and the community coming together to solve local problems. So Muncie's a good example of that.
And there must have been just deep sort of intersection with the Ball State community being in Muncie. But did you kind of dive back into, did your daughters learn to swim at the pool, and were you going to games, and you kind of back to that experience?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so I'd walk into the Target and someone would say, Jeannie Kramer, which always was, a little jarring because I knew it was like, oh my gosh, it's my first grade teacher or whatever. So those moments were new to get used to after having been gone for a while, but also fun, right? It gave me a renewed sense of connection and sense of community. which was different than, living away. So, Kate started coming back to homecoming. My daughter started going to Cardinal Kids Camp, which was, a summer camp taught by our students. So they started to have some, of their own experiences on our beautiful campus. But I think, if I heard in your question, also this realization that Muncie and Ball State, their success is interwoven with one another. And it was apparent to me when I worked at the Community Foundation, but certainly when I came to Ball State. Ball State success, in a lot of ways, Muncie's success is directly connected to that. People know when they're enrolling their sons and daughters in our university, they're sending them to Muncie. And so we have a deep obligation to make sure that Muncie is also a success. And you see that in the university's initiatives in the Muncie community schools and other things. So that mattered to me as someone who grew up here. And as I said, whose parents still live here. So
not exactly the same story, but I'll just share it because it's so recent. My wife and I both grew up in Iowa. Have built the company in the Northeast really since 2010. But have over the last several years, we have 3 boys. We've started spending meaningful periods of time back in Iowa during the summer, which is actually where I was yesterday. I flew out to Boulder for a board meeting, and as I was saying to you, we're now kind of trying to multitask and do the podcast, on the road wherever we are. But we grew up right outside of an area, a town called Decorah, and Luther College is a little college in Northeast Iowa. And it's the same dynamic where it's like Luther and this town Decorah are one and the same. And we just put our boys into their soccer camp last week. And so the same kind of vibe. And I had the opportunity to host their college president, Jennifer Ward, on the podcast. So I tweeted her a picture of my boys at the soccer camp, and she wrote back right away. And she was, working the parade booth that weekend, and just the whole kind of small town, small college dynamic. Obviously, Ball State being larger, but it is just a reminder of how important higher education is as a sort of economic and just social driver in all of these small towns around the country, which is why, when you see headlines about what is the future of higher education, it sort of strikes a different chord when you've lived that intersection. Yeah,
so true. Good point. I love that your boys are having that experience. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. And my 8-year-old came back after the second day, and he goes, "Dad, college must be a dream." And I go, "Why do you say that?" And he said, "Because at lunch, we go to the cafeteria and we can have as much ice cream and brownies as we want. And there are no parents to tell us no." And I'm like, you know what? That's actually a decent window into college. And so, true, but there are consequences, and you're just going to have to work through that. So, yeah.
Got a balance.
So at least he wants
observation. Yeah, you have to.
He wants to go to college. So,
right.
Long-term aspirations as ice cream consumer, questionable, but he wants to go. So we'll get him there. So you had the opportunity to then join the foundation. Was that a no-brainer? Was it a tough decision? And my understanding is you started in a donor relations capacity, which is super interesting because I have, as I said, interviewed over 100 of your peers, and not very many, let's say you can count on one hand, started in donor relations and have, earned the opportunity to do what you're doing now. So just tell me about the initial move and that context, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So when we moved back to Muncie, of course, I talked to, the Ball State family about opportunities at the university, but the Community Foundation, just for where I was and what I wanted for my family at the time, made more sense. It was a unique opportunity in that all of our donors lived in Delaware County. So the travel demands I knew weren't going to be there like they maybe would at the university. So, but your kids get a little bit older and you start to think about things differently. And certainly coming back to work at Ball State was something that I always wanted to do. And donor relations just made a lot of sense for me because, as I shared earlier, I really learned as a fundraiser that that was such a point of impact. And if we didn't do that well, if we didn't tell our story, show impact to the donor, it just made everything else that much harder. And so it really felt like if I wanted to be part of the success of the university, that was a great place to start at Ball State, and a great place to be able to reconnect with donors and alumni. So I was excited to, start my journey there.
And so what's your perspective on donor relations?
Yeah.
What is donor relations?
Yeah. So that's interesting. I'm sure everyone would have a different idea of that. I think for me, it was at the time really showing impact to our benefactors about how they were making a difference and connecting them in a meaningful way to our students. I think higher ed, sometimes it's hard to understand how your $1,000 gift is impacting, an organization with a multi-million-dollar budget. But I think when our benefactors hear from our students, then it's an immediate, oh, of course, I was that kid, right? They started to see themselves in our student story, right? It's in many cases, it's been a long time since our benefactors were on this campus, but boy, the story hasn't changed. Ball State still has a significant number of students who are first generation. And that is a story that is not unique. And many of our donors talk about that fork in the road, right? They could have stayed home. They could have worked in a factory. They could have worked on a farm. They came to Ball State, and it was this transformational experience for them. And while my journey to Ball State was a little bit different in that my father was a professor here, I know my husband's experience of coming to Ball State. He was first generation, and it changed the course of his life and, of course, our family's life. So just in getting to know him and hearing about his Ball State story, I knew that was a story we had to connect our benefactors back to. So I don't know. I didn't answer that in a very
No, I mean,
but I think that's what it's about.
You just used the word story several times. And at the beginning of the conversation, when you were talking about speech communications and feeling like if you could help tell a story, you could do anything. And I feel like that is, and then you've also just shared the importance of a human to human connection. I mean, that's like in a certain degree why we are here today. I mean, I'm a first gen student, and getting opportunity to go to college, like literally, is why I was able to go and start this company and do what we're doing now. And I do think that the opportunity now today to scale that authenticity, to scale the storytelling, to scale the human to human connection is so exciting, because I feel like for a long time, donor relations or maybe annual giving marketing, anything that was broad-based marketing was sort of, students like Brent benefit, right? And it was sort of this nebulous, generic, like student persona. And that's sort of where we were for so long. And then for the very, very top of the pyramid, they get to come to the benefactor dinner and actually sit down with the students, but that's like 1% of the population, and everybody else had to hear about, students like Brent or students like Jeannie, right? And just last week, I received a personal thank you from a Brown football player in the weight room who was working out, saying, "Brent, we appreciate you. Thank you for your continued support of the organization." And it's like, that is so much better when it's not students like Jeannie, but it's Jeannie or Brent or that individual. And I feel like, probably even from when you started 10 years ago at the foundation, what's possible today, not just through, ThankView is one example, but the pandemic, Zoom, being able to connect the president with donors or faculty with donors without it being when can we get in your calendar, and when can you travel, and
Right.
being able to scale that work. So I just kind of love
Right.
your perspective on the then and now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. So, we have two of the best on our team. Lola Maurer and Stormy Harless do this really well. And I really give a lot of credit to them. I mean, I have had the good fortune of working with Lola almost my entire career here at Ball State. And she, from the beginning was like, we have got to do a better job of personalizing our stories and connecting people to our students. And she has just been a consistent voice for that across the organization. And what I often find with Lola is she's the one behind me saying, like, we should really do. And, sometimes you've got a lot of noise. But Lola's right. When she comes to me with an idea, I'm always like, and she's like, yeah, I said that to you maybe like 6 months ago. So, but we get there. And she had, the smarts to hire Stormy, and we've continued to see Stormy grow in our organization. But it starts with their own passion about Ball State and their experience that they had as a student and the opportunities that they feel like they were afforded. And so I think that is always in their core of why they connect so well to what it is that we do here. Yeah, those human to human stories, they make all the difference. And I think over this past couple of years, we were all just yearning for that, right? Everything felt so distant, and a sense of disconnect. And I think being able to put a student on camera to say thank you and send that to a donor in another part of the country or the world just all of a sudden brought Ball State back to donors. And as I said earlier, I think they saw themselves in our students, because the stories haven't changed. I mean, students, certainly challenges may look a little different, but by and large, our students are many of the same stories that students did 20 and 30 years ago. So,
Yeah, we continue to, be inspired by, I mean, just what's happening in the world right now, right? Like we're in the TikTok era right now of the social web, and obviously lots of following by Facebook and Instagram. And then, Cameo, for example, which is a Chicago startup, right? Like literally connecting celebrities to your best friend for their birthday. That's amazing. But it's like that same kind. I mean, frankly, it is exciting and compelling,
right.
But there is no authenticity to that, right? It is a transactional, like I'm going to pay a B or C list celebrity to message my friend.
Right.
And it feels, fun and authentic, but it's not. Whereas like being able to bring the actual authentic, like connection of your students, your community together, leveraging in some ways similar technology, to me is a lot more exciting than something that is truly transactional.
Yeah, so true. Although, so I have two teenage daughters, and we got really into Survivor during the pandemic.
All right, tell me about it.
My first cameo for my daughter was Sandra, who's one. If you're a fan of Survivor, she's the only, I think, 2 or 3-time winner. But anyway, she sent an amazing video to my daughter that she loved. So I do love.
And I will also fess up with my cameo. Everybody, you should share your cameo experiences in the comments below. Yeah. But we, right when the pandemic hit, I decided to write a little song, had a little time on my hands. And so I wrote a song called I'm Working From Home Now, to the tune of I Think We're Alone Now by Tiffany. And it actually got like 100,000 views on LinkedIn. And then my team got me a cameo from Tiffany, and they had shared like my song with her. So, I'm smiling, you're smiling,
right.
But it's that kind of, connection that is now possible that in the past just never was. And it's super exciting. And a lot of this was sort of forced on us by the pandemic. And I think now we've got an opportunity on this side of it to really start thinking about how do we apply that not out of kind of desperation or,
Right.
reaction, but more proactively and more consistently. And even, look, I just saw on your Twitter, and I saw that Stormy had shared this super cool, 360 video experience
Right.
at the, I think, Indiana State Fair or something like that. And so maybe tell me a little bit about, as a leader, stuff
Yeah.
like that is not free, right? I mean,
Right.
investing in video, investing in
Right.
content,
Right.
it is a choice. And there isn't always like a crystal clear return on investment, but
Right.
there is the kind of visceral, you're reaching more people.
Right.
How do you think about it? And then, how do you decide to have representation at the state fair, for example?
Right. Yeah, State Fair was a good time. So yeah, the university I think wanted to have a presence at the State Fair this year and made an investment. And so Stormy and Lola and I went down there and worked on a Friday night, just passing out Ball State, swag and giving football schedules and inviting people back to our campus. Probably 70% of our alumni live in the state of Indiana. So a lot of people pretty close to home. And the 360 was a fun investment that the university made in a way for people to really participate in that day. But I think to your larger point, ThankView for us has been a game changer. We have more donors and alumni talking to us about the videos that they've received that they got a year ago. So, we have a board member, Randy Pond, who lives in California. And almost every time I talk to Randy, he brings up this video that he got from a student and how much he enjoyed it. And he showed it to his wife and he showed it to his daughters. And it just spoke to him in a way that I can't imagine a letter, no matter how good the letter was, would have communicated our story. So I just think those things have had a really lasting impact on our alumni. And so we're excited to continue that partnership and really see the value that video tells the story differently. And I think not scripting our students and allowing them to be who they are, putting them on campus, being able to show a donor. So we sent a video. Patrick Alderdice is one of our donors and gave to a gateway, and being able to go in front of that gateway and film myself and say, Patrick, thank you. Look at what you made possible, and show him the students
So good.
taking selfies, right? Like amazing, as opposed to
So
just
good.
Here's a photo of what you did. So yeah,
so
it just
good.
all brought
No,
it
and I think that actually, like, I'd love to get your perspective on this, but one of the areas that we are really excited about in the coming months and years is thinking about the traditional approach to stewardship and donor relations. And, almost everybody who works in that field can visualize right now what the stewardship matrix looks like, right? At this gift band, then this thing happens. And what those things are different at Ball State versus any other institution. But there is a common set of rules, usually in a spreadsheet, usually run by somebody, in the stewardship group. And we look at those spreadsheets today, and for the most part, I mean, there is definitely evolution where now it might say, hey, at this level, you get a personalized thank you from a student, right? Whereas at this level, maybe it's a more generic thank you because we don't feel like we can truly do one-to-one to everyone. And then, at this level, the president of the university is going to call you, right? I mean, there's a whole bunch of rules, but it feels like there is an opportunity to automate and continue to evolve some of those rules so that, one, we're leaning more on digital, right? Maybe there's a future point where we've got a team of student ambassadors that, if you get to X level, we're actually going to invite you to do a 15-minute conversation with a student beneficiary. And that's going to happen via Zoom or via FaceTime or
Right.
maybe it's just a phone call.
Right.
At this level, it's the president. At this level, it's a thank you. But then I also think that there's a huge opportunity going forward to not just root the stewardship experience in what was just given, but rather what's possible.
Right.
And historically, I think that if somebody, gave a $200 gift and they had $20 million or $200,000 of student loans, for a lot of universities, the stewardship experience is going to be go down the matrix, $200, and this is what they get, versus wait a second, we need to be much more strategic when small gifts from big potential prospects come in to elevate the experience immediately. And we're starting to see some of that happen. I don't know if you've given that thought, but that's probably one of the areas, like the intersection of stewardship and discovery, that we see there being tremendous potential.
Right. Yeah, I think a good example of that for us is what we've done with One Ball State Day, right? So our day of giving, and everyone who gives on that day gets a thank you video, right? So we have students in real time throughout that day, or I think I said everyone. I think it's maybe at $100 or more, but still a significant number are getting those videos, and we're not measuring them based off of, do they have the capability of giving $2 million? It's they give on this day. We want them to feel the energy of our campus. They're going to get a video in real time from a student. And we're seeing that then they reference that when they make another gift that day. They reference it 2 weeks later when they post something on social media that says, I'm so proud of my alma mater, and I love the video I got because I felt the energy of campus that day. We hear that. It's things that they continue to reference throughout the year. So it's been a really important tool for us on our day of giving, to bring the energy to across the country.
No, and I think our hope is that today, for most institutions, days of giving are generally going to be evaluated on donors and dollars on that day. And our hope is that in the not too distant future, it can really become donors, dollars, and pipeline.
Yeah.
Donors, dollars, pipeline, a little bit more kind of that immediate post donation qualification. And then we can bring that same type of experience over the course of the calendar year. I did ask you a question in advance around where you might think the industry is over-investing. And I'm just going to tread lightly and walk on eggshells as I share the snippet of your response. But you said maybe we're over-investing in alumni relations if your alumni relations shop looks the same as it did 10 years ago. What does that mean?
Right. I think if alumni relations is still event-based and you're just having what you've always had, it's the golf outing to have a golf outing. I think if that's still where you are, that is no longer where I think our alumni are. I think our alumni want a meaningful experience that connects them to their alma mater. And maybe that looks like a golf outing, but maybe part of that golf outing should have students there, right? So if one of our goals is mentoring, then maybe students who have newly moved to that area of Indiana are invited to be part of the foursome, golfing with alumni in that community. If you're just there golfing with the same people you could have golfed with last Saturday, I'm not sure that's moving the needle in engagement back to Ball State. So I think that is an industry that's gone through a lot of changes over the past decades, certainly during the pandemic. I think there were a lot of lessons learned, but I think that's one where we better need to connect that work to everything that we're focused on in the life cycle of an alum and a benefactor of the university.
I love it. And, I think that there are competing views on this, but we believe strongly, right? Why do we invest in alumni relations? Mm-hmm. We invest in alumni relations to elevate affinity, drive connection, and generate pipeline for philanthropy. It's literally why we do it. There are people who would hear that and react in a very negative way, fundraising versus fundraising. But I think the intersection of alumni and development is growing. It's accelerating. And one of my favorite examples right now, I got to give a shout out to Jack Tennant at the University of Wyoming, who is their executive director of the Alumni Association. He worked in the foundation previously, worked in development previously, so has great empathy for the opportunity for the alumni relations investment to build community and drive pipeline. And so now every month he is creating a thank you video that is now their alumni newsletter, except it's him out and about the same way you're describing. It's 60 seconds, 90 seconds. This is the monthly digest of, and it gives people a window into his world as the alumni leader. He's down at the local Laramie Farmers Market, similar to Muncie, right? They're totally interconnected. And we are sharing that video. He shares that video to the whole community on a monthly basis.
Yeah, I love that.
But it doesn't stop there. We then are looking at people who watch multiple videos, who have a certain capacity, and then they get assigned to development officers for follow-up. So it's lead generation, even though he's not necessarily talking about how you might give to the University of Wyoming. And some people hear that and they get uncomfortable. They're like, wait a second, you're kind of watching who watches it and then making assignments. Yeah, the same way that we for decades have seen who comes to the event and then we do a follow-up. It's just the digital version of that. And so curious to get your reactions on that kind of strategy.
Yeah, I think connecting the dots. I don't know that we've always done that well. And I think, we're very fortunate here at Ball State that I think many of our alumni leaders have really, over the past couple of years, said, we need to evolve. We learned some things. Let's not forget what we learned during the pandemic, and let's make sure that we're aligned with the university's priorities and that we are helping them reach our goal. That's ultimately why we're here as an association, is to support the goals of the university. And so it's been really enjoyable to work with that leadership group as they have evolved, I would say, over the past several years. But yeah, from the time I first started at Ball State, there was definitely, I think, that push-pull. I mean, we worked all in the same building. And as someone who was on the university advancement team, we didn't have great connections to our colleagues who worked in alumni engagement. So I think that's been years in the making. We've made significant progress. We went through a unification to really bring that structure. So I applaud Ball State's efforts to say we all need to be better working together. So that's been a long time coming. But I think, connecting the dots is huge. And I think sometimes in university advancement worlds, we've been a little slow on the uptick there.
All right, we're wrapping shortly here, but I'm going to ask you one last question and then give you a chance to plug Ball State. Do less and obsess about doing it well. Move deliberately and quickly in all things. Why do those quotes stand out to you?
Yeah. I think kind of to what we were just talking about, I think for a long time we tried to be all things to all people. And I think we have to focus on what it is that we can do well and then do it. And I think we have to move quickly. I think there has long been sort of this, notion around higher ed that we're slow to either respond or slow to change. And I think we've got to move at the pace in which the real world moves. We've got to keep up with that. I think that's the expectation of the people we're engaging. We talk in higher ed about, well, this is normal for higher ed. Well, the reality is it's probably not normal for the rest of the world. So we have to, I think, do a better job of conforming to, I think, the expectations that others have of us, which is responding to their needs, responding and changing appropriately. So that's something we talk about, I think, as a team. And I see my job as removing barriers that sometimes slow that change down. So tell me what the problem is, and then I got to get in front of it so I can get out of it, whatever it is, out of my team's way so that they can do their jobs and do them well.
Jean, there are directors of donor relations listening to this episode right now, thinking to themselves, I could never be a foundation president, or how did she go from donor relations to leading the foundation? What advice do you have to those people or other people that are maybe early in their careers, but get, excited or aspirational about wanting to lead in the way that you are today?
Yeah. So I think, the technical aspect of being any leader, right? You can learn those things, but 80% of my week is on the soft skills, right? And it is that human to human relationship, whether it's with a board member, a campus partner, president of the university. So it's your ability to connect with people. People do things for people they like, right? That's who they want to work with. And I think what you learn in donor relations, or your ability to tell stories, show impact, are the same things that will lead you to opportunities in various leadership roles. And they are the same things that I count on to be able to do as I work with our team here at the foundation, the board, and as I said, campus partners and the president of the university. It's all the same stuff. It's about doing what you say you're going to do, being a good person, being authentic, real, and focusing on that relationship and human-to-human connection. So all the
I
same.
love that. Beautiful concluding thoughts. Although when you said people do things for people they like, I'm now thinking of things that I want done, and I'm wondering, wait a second, maybe they just don't like me. So I'm going to go work on that, at least be a little introspective on it. Tell me about Ball State Foundation. Are you hiring? Why should people be excited and check out the careers page?
Yeah. We are hiring. It's a great organization. What I think we do really well is invest in the person. So we're invested in your success, obviously, here at Ball State, but more importantly, and I always say this to the team, we're invested in you as a human being and want you to be successful, whether it's here or someplace else. And so I take it seriously that it's my job to make sure you have opportunities to grow. And so we've got a lot of positions posted. We're a growing organization, but I think at the end of the day, coming to work has got to be a place where people care about you and what matters to you beyond work. And you would find that here at the foundation. And that really is the character of who Ball State is. So
I love it. Thank you for sharing your story with us, Jean. And I would say to everybody listening, it's at Jean Crosby BSUF on Twitter. I love it when we've got foundation and advancement leaders that are playing an active role, and it's really fun to have a window into your world and see what's going on at Ball State, what you're up to. And then I imagine if folks want to connect on LinkedIn, is that a good way to follow up?
Cool. Yeah, would love that. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing the story again, Jean. I look forward to continuing to get to know you.
Yeah,
and to the whole Ball State team, keep it up. You're setting a great example for the rest of the sector. And so with that, Brent signing off from Boulder, Colorado. My heart rate's a little bit elevated, but got through it with Jean Kramer Crosby, president of the Ball State University Foundation and vice president for university advancement at Ball State University. Thank you, Jean. Take care, everybody.
Thanks so much, Brent.